Hey everybody, it's time for another Rahdo Rules Run Through with Ryan, and today we've got Mythic Mischief. Ryan, take us to class.
Thanks, Rahdo. How do you do, fellow kids? It's Ryan from Knights Around a Table, and this is a prototype copy of Mythic Mischief, an asymmetric abstract strategy game for 2 players, which also plays at the 3 and 4 player count if you play in teams. Ivy Studio has asked me to teach you how to play, so let's get into it. 2 groups of students from Mythic Manor have broken into the school library to swipe some books. But they don't want to get caught by the Tome Keeper, an imposing librarian who putters around putting the books away. Each group knows the other is there, so they've cooked up a little competition. Whichever group can get the other caught the most times by the Tome Keeper before all the books are returned wins. Now, Mythic Mischief is an asymmetric game, which means that each player picks a faction with unique abilities. Well, let's meet the factions. The vampires, Spike, Lockjaw, and Batrude, can put the other team into a trance or bite them to gain blood tokens that power them up. Frankenstein's monsters, Bolt, Bash, and Beast, can throw their opponents around the library and trap them so they can't escape the Tome Keeper. The zombies, Slip, Trip, and Tumble, who maybe should have chosen a different pastime than skateboarding, will repel the Tome Keeper with their rotten stench or make their opponents slip on their guts. And the wizards, Mervyn, Frazzle, and Spark, can teleport around the library or create portals to transport themselves or their opponents. The Tome Keeper spends the game traveling a predictable path, putting books away on space 1, then 2, and then 3. After lunch, 3 new destination tokens come out. The Tome Keeper puts those books away, and then the game ends and the highest scoring player wins. Unless someone manages to score 10 points before that happens. But there are some obstacles in the way. A bunch of bookshelves that act like walls, and piles of clutter that slow down everyone's movement. The placement of the bookshelves and clutter is described in one of these layouts you choose from the rulebook, while the placement of the book delivery locations is up here on the before lunch and then the after lunch cards. Those cards also describe a number of secret entrances into the library that determine where your mythics can re-enter after they're caught and kicked out by the Tome Keeper. You track your moves on your player mat using these counter cubes. Each faction has the same general set of moves, except they work a little differently depending on who you're playing. Each faction also has a powerful special ability, plus a bonus ability that kicks in after lunch when the Tome Keeper has put away the first 3 books. Littered around the library are special books that you can collect to give you more action points on your player board. Well, that's the lay of the land. Let me show you how gameplay goes. Makin Mischief. The Tome Keeper is going to travel to each book drop location in order. So here, and then here, and then here. At the end of your turn, the Tome Keeper travels however many spaces are on the face-up before lunch or after lunch card, taking the shortest route to the next destination. And if there are 2 shortest routes, you, the active player, get to choose which route the Tome Keeper follows. So in this case, where the Tome Keeper could move 3 squares this way or 3 squares this way, if you're the active player, well, you get to pick. And of course, if one of your opponents is on one of those routes, that's the route you'll make the Tome Keeper take in order to score a point. If you ever goof up on your turn and the Tome Keeper catches one of your mythics, you lose a point. Either way, any mythics the Tome Keeper catches along the route get kicked off the board. The Tome Keeper always moves after you take your turn. So what you're trying to do on your turn is to use your abilities to shuffle things around, the bookshelves, your mythics, and your opponent's mythics, in order to get as many of your opponent's mythics caught while the Tome Keeper walks the route. If the Tome Keeper has unspent movement points after reaching a destination, the Tome Keeper will immediately start heading to the next destination with the leftover points. If the Tome Keeper hits the 3rd destination and still has movement points left over, the Tome Keeper will walk towards the crest in the middle of the board. If the Tome Keeper delivers books to that 3rd destination, you flip over the before lunch card and switch to the after lunch card. You wipe out any uncollected books from the board and put out new ones, along with 3 new destinations, and you and your opponent unlock your powerful after lunch ability. After the Tome Keeper hits the 3rd destination after lunch, the game ends. At the beginning of your turn, you have to respawn any of your mythics that got kicked out of the library. The circles on the card show the library's secret entrances. Pick one that isn't blocked by anyone else and put your kicked out mythic there. If every secret entrance is occupied, you can re-enter the library on any space that doesn't have a tome or another mythic on it. Once all your pieces are back on the board, it's time to do stuff. You start with your action cubes marking certain spots. On your turn, you get to spend points from these cubes to perform your actions. Everyone has the same move action. So to move, you turn either of these cubes, well, let's pick this one, from a 2 to a 1, and move one of your mythics orthogonally, north, east, south, or west, and bookshelves block you. If you bump into the Tome Keeper, you lose a point and get kicked out of the library, so don't do that. You're allowed to move through other mythics, yours or the other players, but you can't stop your movement there. Moving into a space with clutter on it takes up 2 movement points. And that rule holds true for the Tome Keeper too. So if the Tome Keeper had to take the shortest path to this destination, it'd have to be this way instead of this way, because this is 1, 2 movements, while this is 1, 2, 3 movements. If you start in or enter a space with one of these special tomes of your color on it, you get to collect it and use it later to bolster your moves, which we'll talk about shortly. Your second ability is usually going to be something that lets you move your opponent's mythics, and the way you do that depends on which faction you're playing. We'll take a closer look at the differences between the factions in a bit. Your third ability describes how your mythics interact with the bookshelves. Different factions can move or hinge or slide the bookshelves around in different ways. By moving the bookshelves, you could dramatically change the path the Tome Keeper needs to follow to reach the next destination, potentially putting yourself out of harm's way, and even scoring points on one or more of your opponent's pieces. The 2 general rules are that you can never move a bookshelf so that a portion of the library is completely unreachable, and you can't move bookshelves to the outer perimeter of the library. Each faction has the same Distract ability, which lets you move the Tome Keeper 1 space toward one of your own mythics. Next, everyone has an overpowered special move that you can only unlock by collecting a special tome from the library and placing it on that spot during the cleanup phase of an earlier turn. Once you use that ability, you lose the tome, and you have to collect another one and place it on that spot if you want to perform your special action again on a future turn. And finally, everyone has a different After Lunch ability that unlocks once the Tome Keeper delivers the first 3 books and you reach the second half of the game. At the end of your turn, after you've done your thing and the Tome Keeper is moved, you perform the cleanup phase. First, you have to slide all your used cubes to the left as far as they'll go. So if the number on the cube doesn't match the number on the board, it's used, and you got to slide it left. If you collected any tomes during this turn, you get to put them on the leftmost end of any abilities you want to power up. So you could stick one here to crank up your move ability. Then you get to boost an ability by moving an action cube 1 space to the right. And you get to do that twice. So you could do like this one, or you could do this one and this one on the same ability. Once you've placed your books and boosted twice and all your cubes are where they ought to be, you update their faces to match the numbers printed above them on your player board. Then it's the next player's turn. Mythic Abilities. Here are the unique abilities each mythic faction has at its disposal. To control other players, the vampires can use lure to draw an opponent nearer to them, 1 space for each lure point you spend, in a straight line, including diagonally. You can't lure enemies through bookshelves, the Tome Keeper, or other mythics, because vampires don't have X-ray vision. But you can lure enemies onto clutter. Their Conceal ability lets them rotate a bookshelf around themselves, like this, or like this, or like this, or like this. The vampire's special ability is to put enemies in a trance. Move a neighboring mythic 2 spaces in a single direction. Mythic Mischief has this concept of neighboring versus adjacent. Adjacent means orthogonal, like this, and neighboring means in any surrounding space, including the diagonals. So trance affects 1 enemy mythic in any surrounding space. Trance ignores the slowdown effect of clutter spaces, but you can't make anyone walk through bookshelves, or use your trance on someone you can't see because there's a bookshelf in the way. Remember that in order to gain access to your special ability, you need to collect a tome and put it in the special spot during the cleanup phase at the end of your turn. And once you use your special ability, the tome gets discarded. For their after lunch ability, every time one of your vampires passes through a space with another player in it, you collect a blood token. At the end of your turn, you use your blood tokens to boost your abilities. And while tomes are always use it or lose it at the end of your turn, you can save these tokens in your blood bank and use them later if you want to. You max out at 4 blood tokens at a time, and you can't use blood to activate your special ability. The monsters can throw an enemy player to the opposite square, either orthogonally or diagonally. The usual restrictions apply. No throwing through bookshelves, and yes, throwing someone onto clutter is fair play. Monsters use their barge ability to shoulder bookshelves out of the way. The bookshelves pivot on the spot to their new location, swinging outward in the direction you choose. The monster's special ability is to intimidate other players by bullying their foes 2 spaces towards the Tome Keeper. You can't intimidate anyone directly into the Tome Keeper. There's no intimidating through bookshelves because, well, monsters can't see through them either. And clutter doesn't slow anyone down when they're intimidated. And after lunch, the monsters have a single trap token that they can use once per turn to prevent an adjacent enemy from using move on that mythic for 1 whole turn. They could potentially use a non-move ability to unstick that piece, though. The zombies have an infect ability that lets them move an adjacent mythic diagonally 1 space. You can infect one of your own mythics or one of your opponents. Zombies can use toss to chuck a bookshelf either behind themselves or 1 space in front. The zombie's special move is stench. If the Tome Keeper is in one of these neighboring spaces, you can repel the Tome Keeper in a single direction. Again, it doesn't work through bookshelves, and clutter doesn't affect this ability. After lunch, the zombies can use their decay ability once per turn to drop a piece of, presumably themselves, as they exit a space on the board. If an enemy mythic blunders into one of these spaces, they trip on the slippery zombie goo. The zombie player gets to move that mythic to any adjacent space. As usual, not through bookshelves and not into another character. The decay token gets removed after the enemy player slips on it. Zombies have 2 decay tokens to play with in total. And finally, the wizards get a warp ability that lets them switch places with a neighboring enemy or ally. You can't warp through bookshelves, but you can warp onto clutter. Wizards can use shift to slide adjacent bookshelves around laterally 1 space. You can't yeet a bookshelf off the board. The wizard's special ability is teleport. Move one of your wizards to any empty space in the library. Teleporting onto clutter is okay too. After lunch, the wizards can drop one of 2 portal tokens once per turn. Once both portals are down, you can move a portal to a spot one of your wizards occupies, once per turn. The 2 portals are considered adjacent to each other, so you can spend move actions warping through them. If you warp to a portal that has someone else on it, you switch places with that character. There are other expansion factions planned for Mythic Mischief, including the Trolls, who can remove bookshelves from the board and phase through their own special bookshelf, and the Witches, who can remodel the library by moving the bookshelves and clutter around. Endgame. The game ends when either a player earns a 10th point, or the Tome Keeper turn finishes after delivering books to the 3rd destination after lunch. At that point, whoever earned the most points wins the game. If there's a tie, whoever has the fewest tomes bolstering their actions on their player board wins. If you're still tied, play again. Game modes. You can play Mythic Mischief with 3 or 4 players too. In a 3-player game, 2 players team up against the solo player. The solo player gets to start with 3 mythics on the board, while the teammates get 2 mythics each. The team takes their turn simultaneously. They only get 1 tome color on the board, and either team member can grab the team's tomes, but the player who grabs the books is the team member who gets to place them on his or her player board during the cleanup phase. And the team members only get to boost 1 ability during the cleanup phase, instead of 2. The 4-player game is similar. You've got 2 teams of 2 where each player picks a faction and gets to place 2 mythics. The books are shared between teams again. The teams play their turns simultaneously, and each team member gets 1 ability boost during the cleanup phase. If you own 2 copies of the game, or the big box version of Mythic Mischief, you can set up a bracket and play in a winner-takes-all tournament mode. And if you want the game to feel a bit more like speed chess where your moves are timed, you can try Blitz mode. Each player gets 120 seconds to finish a turn, and once mythics are removed from the board, they're gone for good. The winner is the player with the last mythic standing. The timer just governs your turn taking. You have to take all of your actions within 2 minutes, but you can relax during the cleanup phase. The timer restarts for the next player when your cleanup phase is over. In 4-player Blitz, if you have 2 boards, you can put them next to each other. Each board gets its own destination cards and Tome Keeper, but now mythics can travel between the 2 boards. Setup. To set up the game, each player picks a faction. Grab your player board, the tomes in your color, and your action cubes. Put the action cubes on the board wherever you see a dot, and then turn the cubes so the numbers match the spaces they're on. Make sure to grab any extra tokens unique to your faction, like the monster's trap. Lay down the library board. Randomly draw 1 before lunch card here and place a random face down after lunch card here. The before lunch card tells you where the destination tokens and tomes go. The Tome Keeper starts in the middle. Each team gets a tome on the score tracker. Roll an action die. The highest rolling player gets to choose who goes first. The player who doesn't go first starts with a bonus tome to permanently bolster an action. Follow one of the 3 layouts in the rulebook to place the bookshelves and clutter. Alternatively, you can draft the placements of the bookshelves and clutter, starting with the second player. Take turns back and forth with each player placing a bookshelf or clutter token until you've got 10 shelves and 4 piles of clutter on the board. And now you're ready to play Mythic Mischief.
Thanks, Ryan. I think we've got it. And if you folks would like to learn a little bit more about this game, you can follow the links that are on the screen right now or down in the show notes in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.